Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start our bulletin from US President Donald Trump, who has rejected Iran's offer for talks. In a tweet, Trump said no thanks to Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's proposal on condition of lifting sanctions. Reacting to Trump's tweet, Zarif advised the US President to make his comments and decisions on facts rather than headlines. Yesterday, in an interview, the Iranian foreign minister said he is not ruling out negotiations with the U.S. despite the killing of General Qasem Soleimani. However, he said the U.S. must lift sanctions if it wants to resume a dialogue. Zarif said the U.S. has inflicted great harm on the Iranian people and it will have to compensate for that. In China, the death toll from the Wuhan coronavirus has jumped to 56, while nearly 2,000 people are infected. China's National Health Commission says the virus's ability to spread is getting stronger and the number of infections could continue to rise. Meanwhile, Beijing has ordered a nationwide ban on all wildlife trade. More in this report.
China has locked down over 100 million people in the hard-hit province of Hubei and neighboring Hunan in a bid to contain the spread of the deadly coronavirus. But the virus has already spread throughout China and around the world, with cases confirmed in countries as distant as France, Australia, Canada, and the US. US State Department says it is arranging a flight to evacuate its staff at its consulate in Wuhan, as well as other American citizens trapped in the city. Canada confirmed its first case of the coronavirus in a resident who recently returned from Wuhan.
So the case is in a male who's in his 50s. He had traveled to Wuhan, China, and come back, and within a day became quite ill. And the emergency service was aware of his travel history, used full precautions, was taken to Sunnybrook Hospital, and is now in a negative pressure room. All the staff are taking appropriate precautions, and the condition is stable.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong residents say the emergency measures taken by China are not enough. They say the government should limit the city's links with mainland China. They demand the government should limit Hong Kong's links with mainland China. Medical staff from other cities has arrived in Wuhan to support the fight against the virus. The symptoms of the deadly incurable disease include fever, coughing, and breathing difficulties.
In Indian-occupied Kashmir, occupation forces have murdered 3 more civilians in Pulwama district. The civilians were targeted during a cordon and search operation by Indian troops. Indian occupation forces have killed over a dozen civilians during the ongoing month. India's lockdown and communications blackout of the valley have entered their 175th day. Kashmiris on both sides of the line of control and around the world are observing India's Republic Day as Black Day. Protest rallies are being held worldwide to draw attention to Indian atrocities in occupied valley. In their statement, the Hurriyat leaders called for rallies and protests in the occupied valley in defiance of the ongoing curfew. India has completely shut down the valley for the last 5 months, leading to medical, communications and education crises, which are worsening by the day. Meanwhile, the Indian state of Assam was rocked by 4 grenade explosions today. Police say 3 explosions took place in the Dibrugarh district and another in Chiraidio district. No casualty has been reported yet. India is observing its 71st Republic Day in celebration of the country's constitution. But Indians at home and abroad fear the constitution is now under attack by the ruling BJP government and its extremist ideology. More in this report.
Since the re-election of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in May last year, India has been in serious socio-political turmoil. BJP government's authoritarian and discriminatory measures have eroded New Delhi's secular ideology as its international image crumbles. The illegal annexation and lockdown of occupied Kashmir and the controversial Citizenship Act have sparked mass protests across the country.
We've seen today the crowds in Shaheen Bagh every night here, and this is being repeated in so many places, so many different kinds of conversations are happening. And that's what we needed. We now, Indians, we live on the streets. Long live the street.
Indians inside the country and abroad are raising their voice against the act, terming it anti-Muslim. Modi's government has been guilty of bait and charging peaceful demonstrations and subjecting women to sexual harassment and assault. Attacks on Jawaharlal Nehru and Jamia Millia universities in New Delhi by BJP-linked groups have fueled further dissent.
We are sitting for a mass hunger strike. We have been protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which has now become Citizenship Amendment Act for the past 2 months. We want to tell this government to start thinking about Assam now. Why are you not thinking about Assam?
27 protesters have so far been killed in protests.
The southern Indian state of Telangana is all set to pass a resolution against the controversial Citizenship Act. Earlier, the states of Rajasthan, Punjab and Kerala passed similar resolutions as protests against the act continue across India.
Telangana Chief Minister Chandrasekhar Rao has also raised his voice against the citizenship law. Talking to the media, Rao said he will call a conclave of ministers in the next 1 month to take this step. He said this new act is a concern for the future of the country as this is not good for India. Meanwhile, Muslim organization Tawheed Jamaat and other non-political Islamic bodies protested against the law in Tamil Nadu. Thousands of people took part in the march from Uzvar Sandi to Tiruchi electorate, where a public meeting was held. The demonstrators raised anti-government and anti-Modi slogans. Elsewhere, Indian Congress leader Chidambaram has called for speeding up the protests on India's Republic Day. In a tweet, he said the country is raising flag. It should also raise the level of protests.
Well, these protests are not limited to India, but they're happening worldwide. On India's Republic Day, anti-New Delhi banners appeared in Bangladeshi capital Dhaka against its anti-Muslim policies. Civil society put up banners across the city highlighting the Kashmiri crisis and the controversial Citizenship Act. The banners are inscribed with slogans demanding an end to India's lockdown of occupied Kashmir and the discriminatory new law. The protest banners have also demanded the end of civilians' killings by Indian forces at the India-Bangladesh border. Meanwhile, a student staged a sit-in against the killing of a Bangladeshi civilian at the border with India. The student demanded an apology from India and an inquiry committee on the Indian forces' attacks. Similarly, in London, thousands held mass rallies against India's controversial citizenship law. Students, activists and members of human rights organizations gathered opposite Downing Street for the protest. They marched around a mile down the street to gather outside the Indian High Commission. Meanwhile, another protest is scheduled today outside the India House in London as part of the Black Day observations. The Indian High Commission has raised serious concerns over the safety of the mission. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has pledged robust security to prevent any violence during the protests. Welcome back. In Lebanon, security forces have fired water cannons and tear gas at the protesters trying to breach a barricade outside the government headquarters in Beirut. Protesters accused the security forces of torture as the uprising hit the 100-day mark. Lebanon's internal security forces asked the peaceful protesters to leave the Riyadh al-Sol area as the violent rioting attacks continue. Earlier peaceful demonstrations turned violent after police clashed with the protesters. Moving on to Syria, where the government forces say they have taken control of the 6 towns in Idlib in a renewed push to recapture the lost rebel stronghold. A war monitor said the forces have reached the outskirts of Marat al-Noman. This is despite a ceasefire deal between Turkey and Russia. Thousands of people have fled Idlib in recent weeks amid stepped-up airstrikes by Russian and Syrian forces. The push deeper into rebel-held territory has taken place despite a ceasefire deal brokered by Turkey and Russia. On Friday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said 400,000 people from Idlib were moving towards the Turkish border. Rights groups say airstrikes have hit civilian areas, but Moscow and Damascus claim they are fighting militants. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has accused commander of the eastern forces in Libya, Khalifa Haftar, of continuing attacks despite a ceasefire. Erdogan said Haftar could not be trusted to uphold the truce. He said it isn't possible to expect mercy and understanding from someone like the LNA commander. Erdogan's statement comes after the UN said several countries violated the arms embargo in Libya agreed on at the Berlin conference. In a statement, the UN support mission said the illegal influx of fighters and weapons into the country threatens the fragile peace process. In Mali, 19 soldiers have been killed in a terrorist attack at a military camp in Sakolo town. Security forces say the militants also stole military equipment from the base. Mali has been struggling to contain an insurgency that has claimed thousands of lives since it erupted in the north in 2012. More than 140 Malian soldiers died in attacks between September and December last year. Italians are voting to elect the president of the Emilia-Romagna region. Far-right opposition leader Matteo Salvini is using everything at his disposal, winning in the region run by the left since 1945. Emilia-Romagna is a wealthy area known for its Parmesan cheese, Parma ham, and the car maker Ferrari. Salvini says a victory for the right will destabilize the country's fragile coalition government and help him return to power. Opinion polls suggest Salvini's anti-immigrant league is neck and neck with the ruling center-left Democratic Party, which governs Italy. 3.5 million citizens are eligible to cast ballots in today's polls. Street protests have flared up again in Chile's capital, Santiago. Protesters are demonstrating against the economic inequality and the right-wing government. Police fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse the raging crowd near the capital's Plaza Italia. Meanwhile, a Chilean police officer appeared in the court to face charges for wounding a protester's eye. The officer was formally accused of firing buckshot into the protester's left eye. Since October, the country has been in the midst of its worst social unrest. Chile has issued a red alert after a forest fire burned over 2 square kilometers of vegetation in the southern region of Biobío. The fire zone includes part of the Noguean National Reserve in Concepcion province, which is a habitat for some endangered species. Concepcion Governor Robert Contreras said efforts to extinguish fire are underway. He said authorities are monitoring the situation and evaluating the damage. Contreras said there are no reports of casualties so far, and the area has already been evacuated. Local authorities are concerned about predictions of high temperature that increases the risk of the wildfires. 30 people have been killed, including 2 children, by storms in southeastern Brazil. Officials say 7 people are injured due to landslides and house collapses in the state of Minas Gerais. 3,500 were evacuated in Minas Gerais state, while the government says 17 are still missing. Several highways have been cut by the flooding and scores of bridges knocked out. Rainfall in the region has been the heaviest since the records were first kept 110 years ago. In one 24-hour period, state capital Belo Horizonte recorded 172 millimeters of rain. The flood coincided with the first anniversary of the dam collapse in the Minas Gerais town of Brumadinho. In Peru, the death toll in the explosion of a gas tanker has risen to 14. The tanker carrying 10,000 liters of liquefied gas exploded, igniting a major fire that destroyed several houses and vehicles in the capital Lima. The health ministry said the dead included 5 children and a 40-year man from Venezuela. The accident in the capital's Villa El Salvador district left nearly 50 others seriously injured. Investigators believe the explosion was triggered by a detachment of a fuel hose as the tanker truck passed over a speed bump. Peruvians are set to vote today to elect a new parliament after the previous was dissolved by President Martin Vizcarra. 21 parties are running in the elections, and exit polls suggest centrist politicians could win a majority. Under the country's electoral laws, parties require at least 5% of the popular vote or 7 elected legislators to gain representation. The high number of undecided voters could result in a fragmented Congress. Voting is mandatory in Latin America's fifth largest economy, and some 25 million people are eligible to vote. Vizcarra had dissolved the chamber in September last year after arguing that lawmakers were obstructing his anti-corruption agenda. In Turkey, the death toll from Friday's earthquake has surged to 31. The 6.8 magnitude earthquake was centered in Elazig province and neighboring Malatya. Disaster and Emergency Management Authority said over 1,500 people have been injured. The authorities said 45 people, including a woman, have been so far rescued from under the rubble. Over 3,400 personnel with hundreds of vehicles and 17 sniffer dogs are taking part in the rescue operation. 31 people are dead, while over 100,000 have been displaced by a week of heavy rains in Madagascar's northwest. The National Disaster Management Office says 15 people are still missing as flooding intensified in the districts of Metsinjo and Maivetanana. The National Bureau of Disaster Risk Management warns of a high risk of food insecurity amid flooding in lowland and rice-growing areas. Rains swept away strips of roads, cutting off access to the affected areas. A dam burst near the town of Tenambe, flooding nearby villages and farmland. German charity CHILE has rescued 78 migrants off the Libyan coast. It said 8 women and 7 children are among those rescued. The charity said its ship rescued 62 people from an inflatable boat. It said the rescue ship rescued another 16 people from a second boat. The CI has accused Libyan Coast Guards of harassment, saying they treat the area of search and rescue operations as their territorial waters. Boeing has successfully completed the first test flight of the world's largest twin-engine jet. The aircraft will officially be called the 777-9, but is better known under its development codename 777X. The plane touched down at the historic Boeing field outside Seattle after almost 4 hours of flight. The almost 77-meter-long passenger jet will go head-to-head with Airbus A350-1000, which seats about 360 passengers. The 777X is expected to enter service in 2021, a year later than originally scheduled amid development programs. Another weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.